Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. And may the peace, mercy, and blessings of Allah be upon you. I want you to just sit with a feeling for a second. It's a feeling that is almost completely universal right now.
Yeah, really no matter where you live or, what you do for a living.
Right, exactly. It is that creeping, relentless sense of burnout, that heavy, dragging sensation when you wake up, look at the day ahead, and just feel the sheer friction of daily life.
Oh, absolutely. The commute, the demanding job.
Yeah, the fluctuating economy, the bills, the endless social expectations. I mean, we live in an era with these confusing, almost impossible metrics of modern success.
Where you're supposed to be, perfectly happy all the time.
Yes, effortlessly wealthy, constantly glowing, and somehow operating at peak productivity 24/7. And when you inevitably hit a wall, when you feel exhausted or overwhelmed, your first thought is usually, I am doing something wrong. My life is broken.
Like this friction is a glitch in the system.
Exactly. But what if the premise we've all just blindly accepted is entirely backwards?
That's the big question.
Right. What if this struggle, this exhausting friction you feel, isn't the glitch in the system at all? What if it is the actual engine? So today we are taking a deep dive into a 1,400-year-old blueprint.
Surah Al-Balad, chapter 90 of the Quran.
Yes, and our mission today is to go through this entire chapter, from the very first verse to the absolute last, because it just completely shatters our modern illusions about comfort, about wealth, and most importantly, about the purpose of pain.
It really does. And to understand the depth of this chapter, we are pulling from a massive, rich tradition of knowledge. I mean, we aren't just looking at this as some ancient history lesson.
Right, we're blending sources.
Yeah, exactly. We're taking foundational classical texts like Al-Tabari, Ibn Kathir, Al-Qurtubi, and overlaying them with the brilliant psychological depth of the Hanbali tradition. Scholars like Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qayyim.
And bring in modern applied reflections too, right?
Definitely. Scholars like Sayyid Qutb, Numan Ali Khan, Yasir Qadi, and Omar Suleiman. The idea is to bridge the ancient world of Makkah with our exact present moment.
So before we actually read the first verse, we kind of need to set the stage. Because when people read religious texts, there's always this immediate urge to ask, okay, what historical event triggered this specific passage?
Right, the occasions of revelation, the asbab an-nuzul.
Exactly. But from what I understand, trying to pin this chapter down to one specific guy on one specific Tuesday in 7th century Arabia is, well, it's actually missing the bigger picture, isn't it?
It really is. That's a crucial point to wrap your head around, because foundational historians, they always try to anchor verses to specific historical moments, right?
Yeah.
To give us a sociological snapshot.
Which makes sense.
It does. So some historical reports might say, oh, a certain verse in this chapter is about a wealthy Meccan elite named Abu al-Asad, while another report might argue, no, it's actually about al-Walid bin Mamukira, who was another incredibly powerful figure.
And modern academics debate this a lot.
Right. Oh, heavily. Modern academic debates, like those brought up by Joshua Little and others, often point out these historiographical gaps in conflicting hadiths. But those gaps actually reveal something profound about how the text functions.
How so? Because usually conflicting reports make people question the validity of the text altogether.
Right. But in this case, the text isn't acting like a newspaper reporting on a local crime. It is utilizing a specific, powerful archetype.
An archetype. Okay, break that down for me.
So the Quran is painting a psychological portrait of arrogance and extreme materialism. That portrait perfectly described the corrupt Qurayshi elite in 7th century Makkah, absolutely. But it applies just as flawlessly to an arrogant billionaire today who hoards wealth while ignoring the suffering of the masses.
Wow, yeah. So it's timeless.
Exactly. The text didn't want you to just think about a dead guy from 1,400 years ago. It wants you to see the pattern of human behavior that repeats in every single generation.
So for you, the listener, why should you care about this? Why invest an hour into understanding a Meccan chapter from the 7th century? Well, because this is a masterclass in moral psychology. It offers a radical, uncomfortable, but ultimately liberating blueprint for social justice.
And personal resilience.
Yes. On a deeply personal level, it provides a framework for resilience. If you have ever felt completely crushed by the weight of your responsibilities or the tragedies of the world, this text is speaking directly to you. It resets the baseline of what it actually means to be human.
It truly does. And the way it begins that reset is grammatically shocking.
Oh, I love this part. Let's get into the verses. So the text opens with this majestic, solemn oath. But it does it in a way that feels like a total paradox.
Yeah, that throws you off immediately.
Right, the very first phrase of the surah is, La usimu bihad balad. Now, usimu bihad balad means, I swear by this city. And everyone understands that the city being referenced is Makkah, the sacred sanctuary.
The physical epicenter of worship.
Exactly. But the very first word of the chapter, right before that oath, is law, nay, no.
Which creates an immediate lexical mystery. I mean, why would the creator place a negative particle, the word no, right before taking a massive divine oath?
It seems so counterintuitive.
It does, and this has been a beautiful intersection of linguistics and theology for centuries. Essentially, classical thinkers looked at this law in three different ways. The first view, held by commentaries like Al-Jalalain, is that the law is an ancient poetic device.
So it's superfluous? Or emphatic?
Exactly, emphatic. It doesn't literally mean I refuse to swear. It's more like a rhetorical amplifier, like when someone says, no, listen to me, I absolutely swear this is true.
Okay, that makes sense. In classical Arabic poetry, starting with a negative particle just captures the listener's attention instantly.
Right, it amplifies the gravity. But then you have the second view, heavily championed by the great classical theologian Fakhr al-Din al-Razi, and he takes it literally.
He calls it a negatory law, right?
Yes, he says God is literally declaring, I do not swear by this city.
Wait, but why wouldn't God swear by Makkah? I mean, it is the holiest geographic site in the Islamic tradition. It's the sanctuary built by Abraham.
True, but you have to look at the political and social context of that exact moment. Makkah's entire identity, its inherent sanctity, stems from the ancient decree that it is a sanctuary of peace. Bloodshed, violence, and oppression are strictly prohibited within its borders.
Right. Even before Islam, tribes wouldn't attack each other in Makkah.
Exactly. But the Quraysh, the ruling tribe at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, had entirely defiled that sanctity. They were violently persecuting the Prophet and the early marginalized Muslims right there in the sanctuary.
Oh, wow. So they were torturing the weak while actively claiming to be the guardians of the holy house.
Precisely. So Al-Razi says God is refusing to swear by Makkah in its current defiled, hypocritical state. It is a massive, crushing theological indictment of the Quraysh.
That drastically changes the tone. It goes from a simple oath to like a divine protest.
Yeah, it's powerful. And then there's a third way to read this law, which Ibn Kathir talks about.
The refutational view.
Yes. Classical authorities argue that the law is a preemptive strike against the audience. It is an immediate nay or no directed at the false, arrogant beliefs of the polytheists listening.
It's as if God is saying, no to all your delusions, no to your corrupt worldview. Now that I have your attention, I swear by this city to tell you the truth.
Exactly. And modern linguistic analysis adds such a brilliant layer to this. Nouman Ali Khan points this out beautifully.
Oh, about the transition from the previous chapter.
Yes. When you look at the structure of the Quran, the chapter right before this one is Surah Al-Fajr. And the final verses of Surah Al-Fajr paint this incredibly beautiful, serene image of the tranquil soul. A soul at complete peace entering paradise.
And then you turn the page, and the very next word you hear is bam. La. Nay, I swear by this city.
It violently wakes you up.
It creates this jarring cognitive dissonance. You go from absolute, tranquil, heavenly peace straight into the physical, chaotic, hostile epicenter of Makkah. It's almost telling the listener that true spiritual peace isn't found by just escaping the world.
Right. It has to be maintained right in the middle of a hostile environment.
That is a phenomenal transition, because that hostility is directly addressed in the very next verse. Verse 2 says, Wa anta hilan by Al-Balad, and you are free, or you are permitted in this city. God is addressing the Prophet Muhammad directly here.
And this verse introduces a really fascinating timeline puzzle.
Oh, yeah. The contradiction.
Right. The verse is telling the prophet that he is hilan permitted or free from restriction in Makkah, but classical jurisprudential scholars often say this verse is actually a reference to the conquest of Makkah.
Which was an event where the prophet returned with an army, and the divine prohibition against fighting in the sacred city was temporarily lifted for him for just a few hours.
Exactly. So he could establish justice and cleanse the Kaaba of idols. The law of the sanctuary was temporarily suspended for him.
But here's the paradox. Surah Al-Balad is universally classified as an early Meccan revelation. I mean, it was revealed during the absolute darkest, most oppressive days of the persecution.
Years before the prophet was forced to flee to Medina.
Right. The conquest of Makkah didn't happen until nearly a decade after this verse was revealed. So how was a verse revealed in a time of total weakness, talking about an event of total victory 10 years in the future?
It serves a brilliant dual purpose. First, it acts as a prophecy. Just put yourself in the prophet's shoes for a moment. You are isolated, your followers are being tortured, you are facing imminent exile from the only home you've ever known.
The city you love.
Yeah. And in that moment of absolute darkness, God reveals a verse that basically says, "You are permitted in this city, you will have authority here." It is a foreshadowing of an eventual, inevitable victory that seemed logically impossible at the time.
It's a light at the end of a very long, dark tunnel.
Exactly. But secondly, and this is where Akhwar-Tubi's legal insight and the psychological comfort come in, it addresses his immediate reality. The Quraysh were systematically telling the prophet, "You do not belong here. You are an outcast. You are disrupting our traditions."
And God intervenes to say, no, this is your city.
More than that, God is saying, your physical presence here is what currently sanctifies this space. The space doesn't validate you, you validate the space.
Oh, wow. That elevates the prophet's moral status high above the ancient tribal customs of the Qur'an.
Absolutely. They claimed to honor the sanctuary, but they were shedding innocent blood. He was the true guardian of its peace.
Which flows perfectly into the searing irony of verse 3. The oath expands. God says, wa walidin wa mawalad, and by the begetter, and that which he begot.
Now, who is the begetter and the begotten? Classical scholars have two main interpretations here. First, Al-Tabari's universal view looks at the macro scale. The begetter is Adam, and the begotten is the entirety of the human race.
So that links the sacred geography of Makkah to the broader universal narratives of the human species.
Right. Makkah isn't just a local tribal hub for trading spices. It is the spiritual zero point for all mankind. But then you have Al-Razi's contextual view,
Which argues this is specifically referencing the prophet Abraham and his son Ismail.
who historically built the foundations of the Kaaba in Makkah. And if you look at that contextual view, the political irony is just devastating to the Quraysh.
It really is. I mean, think about the political economy of Makkah at the time. The Quraysh based their entire cultural supremacy, their wealth, their political power on the fact that they were the biological descendants of Ibrahim.
They controlled his temple.
They charged tolls to pilgrims coming to it. They endlessly bragged about their noble founding father. But here is the Prophet Muhammad carrying the exact, pure, uncorrupted, monotheistic legacy of Ibrahim. And what are the Quraysh doing?
And they're trying to kill him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They boast about the ancestor while actively persecuting the true spiritual heir. It's like a corrupt dynasty bragging about their founding father while actively destroying the founder's actual heir.
It completely strips them of their tribal pride. The oath exposes the absolute bankruptcy of their social hierarchy.
So the stage is now perfectly set. God is sworn by the sacred city, validated the persecuted prophet, and called upon the legacy of humanity and the patriarchs. The tension is
The
palpable.
listener is definitely leaning in.
And then in verse 4, the surah drops its central gravity-shifting thesis about what it means to be a human being. God says, "Laqad khalaqna al-insana fi kabad." Verily, we have created man in hardship, or we have created man in toil.
The word used here is kabad, and kabad is one of the most profound, heavy, conceptually dense words in the entire Arabic language.
Let's break down the etymology.
Yeah, if we look at its root etymology, it doesn't just mean having a bad afternoon. It denotes intense pressure. It means physical exertion. It means friction. It is the concept of bearing an incredibly heavy load that threatens to crush you.
And the classical generations of scholars explain that kabad isn't an isolated event, right? It encompasses the absolute entirety of the human life cycle.
Completely. They describe it as a relentless sequence of friction. It starts with the sheer pain, pressure, and biological trauma of gestation and childbirth.
Both for the mother enduring the labor and the infant being forcefully pushed into a cold, bright world.
Exactly. Then it's the struggle of the child crying for sustenance, the literal physical struggle of learning to walk and falling down over and over. Then you grow up and it's the relentless, exhausting pursuit of a livelihood.
The inevitability of physical sickness.
The emotional agony of losing loved ones, the terrifying physical breakdown of the body during death, and ultimately the immense severity of standing accountable on the day of judgment. Kabad is the air we breathe.
What this single short verse does is establish a universal baseline reality. It is telling you the struggle is not an anomaly. It is not an accidental glitch in your life. It is the defining intentional architecture of human existence. You are literally designed for friction.
Which is a very hard pill to swallow for modern people.
It really is. And we have to pause here. Because when you say you are designed for friction and God intentionally created you in hardship, that naturally triggers a massive, visceral, philosophical pushback.
Oh, without a doubt.
I guarantee you every listener has asked this question or had a friend ask it in a moment of grief. If God is supposedly all-merciful, all-loving, and all-powerful, why design a biological and spiritual system based on friction, pain, and exhaustion? Why not just create us in eternal comfort? Why kabod?
You are bringing up the age-old question of why bad things happen to good people. In theology, this is called theodicy, reconciling human suffering with a merciful creator.
And this is where the Holm-Bali framework comes in, right?
Yes. To understand this, we have to look at the absolute genius of the 13th century scholar Ibn Taymiyyah. His framework for understanding suffering is perhaps the most brilliant psychological analysis in religious history. He argued that worldly trials are never arbitrary punishments.
They aren't just random acts of cruelty.
No, they are meticulously designed instruments of spiritual and psychological evolution. He provided 5 distinct lenses through which we must view the friction of kabod.
Let's walk through these 5 lenses because understanding this completely rewires how you experience a bad day or even a deep tragedy. The first lens is assessment. What does that mean?
Think about human virtues: patience, courage, gratitude, resilience, altruism. In a vacuum of perfect ease where you have everything you want the second you want it, those virtues remain entirely theoretical.
Right. You can't be patient if there's nothing to wait for.
Exactly. You cannot truthfully claim to be a patient person, to have saber, if you have never been delayed, denied, or inconvenienced. You cannot claim to be courageous if you have never faced genuine fear.
So kabod provides the necessary resistance.
Yes, the friction that converts your potential virtue into an actualized, measurable reality. You don't just magically possess a spiritual rank, you earn it through the test of friction.
I always think about it like aerodynamic drag. Like if you want an airplane to generate lift and ascend into the sky, it literally requires the friction of air moving rapidly against the wings. Without that resistance, the plane cannot fly.
That's a great analogy.
Or think about the tires on your car. If you completely eliminate friction like driving on pure ice, you lose all control and you crash. You need the friction of the road to steer.
Absolutely. The second lens Ibn Taymiyyah offers is redemptive discipline. And this lens is really about stripping away our most dangerous illusions.
Because human beings are naturally pretty arrogant.
Oh, very much so. When we are completely comfortable, wealthy, and healthy, we tend to develop a God complex. We think we are entirely self-sufficient, that we control our destiny.
And then suddenly an illness strikes, or a financial collapse happens.
Or a natural disaster hits. And that hardship forcefully and violently reminds us of our ultimate fragility. It strips away the illusion of worldly permanence. Ibn Taymiyyah says it breaks the ego to save the soul. It forces a person into a state of absolute desperate reliance or tawakkul on the divine.
It's a humbling mechanism, which leads to the third lens, the greater good. Now, this one is tough because it asks us to look past our immediate pain.
It requires zooming out far beyond our limited human perspective. Ibn Taymiyyah argues that individual localized suffering often precipitates collective, long-term societal benefits that our limited minds cannot immediately calculate.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. He points to historical events like the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. At the time, this treaty felt like a humiliating, crushing political defeat for the early Muslims. They were denied entry to Makkah, and the terms seemed entirely one-sided against them.
The companions of the Prophet were deeply distressed by it, right?
Very distressed.
Yeah.
But historically, that temporary period of peace and perceived weakness was the exact strategic mechanism that allowed the message of Islam to spread universally without the threat of constant war. Years later, they realized the quote-unquote defeat was actually a massive victory.
So our limited perception has to surrender to the idea that God is playing a much longer game.
Exactly. The fourth lens is one that makes so much intuitive sense to human psychology: the necessity of opposites.
I love this one.
The human intellect is designed to comprehend value only through contrast. How do you explain the brilliant concept of light to someone who has never, ever experienced darkness?
You can't. Or how do you explain the comfort of warmth without the biting pain of the cold?
You literally can't. The ultimate unimaginable ease and bliss of paradise in the afterlife can only be fully appreciated, deeply savored, and understood because we have experienced the bitter, exhausting toil of worldly kabod.
The friction we experience here literally creates the psychological and spiritual capacity for joy there. We only know what a full stomach feels like because we know the pangs of hunger.
Exactly. And the final, fifth lens, the manifestation of divine names.
This one is deeply theological.
It is. In the Islamic tradition, God has many profound, beautiful attributes. God is the infinitely merciful, the compeller, the one who mends what is fundamentally broken, the forgiving.
But those attributes need a context, right?
Yes, they require a context to manifest in the human realm. God's ultimate mercy is most profoundly felt, understood, and appreciated when a human being is in a state of desperate, shattering need. God's ability to mend requires human brokenness.
So the struggle of kabod provides the necessary canvas upon which the majesty of God's attributes is fully displayed.
Exactly. And building on this incredible framework, Ibn Taymiyyah's legendary student Ibn Qayyim takes this concept of friction and turns it into a psychological masterpiece.
In his book, Miftah Dar al-Sada, right, The Key to the Abode of Happiness.
Yes, he creates this bridge analogy that is so vivid it just sticks with you forever. In Islamic eschatology, the theology of the end times, there is a belief that every soul must eventually cross the Sirat.
The Sirat is a terrifying, razor-thin bridge suspended directly over hellfire, and it is the only path to reach paradise.
Right. And Ibn Qayyim argues that this physical bridge in the hereafter is not a random obstacle course. It is a direct one-to-one reflection of the metaphorical straight path we walk in this life.
He says that as we walk through the kabod, the friction of this world, we are constantly being attacked and pulled by two things. First, intellectual doubts that attack our faith and make us cynical. Second, base desires, greed, and addictions that attack our morality.
And here's the genius part. Ibn Qayyim says that these worldly doubts and desires directly correlate to physical hooks, thorns, and grapples that will rise up to snatch people off the physical bridge in the hereafter.
Wow. So if you surrender to the cynical doubts and the corrupt desires here in this life, those exact same hooks will physically catch you and pull you down there.
Precisely. But if you push through the kabod of this world, if you endure the friction, maintain your faith, and build moral resilience, that worldly resilience directly dictates your velocity in the hereafter.
You won't stumble across the bridge. You will cross it like a bolt of lightning.
Because the struggle isn't senseless suffering. It is the literal training ground for your eternal salvation. You are building the spiritual muscles required to cross the abyss.
And what's truly amazing is that these scholars weren't just theorizing from comfortable ivory tower libraries. I mean, they lived this friction.
Oh, deeply. Ibn Taymiyyah spent years as a political prisoner under the Mamluk authorities.
Right. He was subjected to intense persecution, thrown into solitary confinement in the citadel of Damascus. His political enemies eventually even stripped him of his ink, his parchment, and his books.
Which, for a scholar of his magnitude, was a torture worse than physical beatings.
He embodied the absolute maximum level of kabod. Yet, historians note that Ibn Taymiyyah maintained a state of profound, unshakable internal bliss in his prison cell.
He famously said, "What can my enemies do to me? My paradise is in my heart. If they imprison me, it is a spiritual retreat. If they exile me, it is a journey. If they kill me, it is martyrdom."
He had completely aligned his internal compass with the divine reality. He accepted the friction as the exact mechanism of his elevation. He fundamentally understood that the prison walls were just another manifestation of kabod, and he used them to generate spiritual lift.
It's incredible.
So bringing it back to you, the listener, think about your own modern burnout. We literally exhaust ourselves, working jobs we hate, trying to afford a lifestyle that promises to eliminate all friction.
We buy all the gadgets, we pay for the premium delivery services, we isolate ourselves in gated communities, all in a desperate attempt to avoid kabod.
But realizing that friction is a deliberate design feature entirely changes how you endure the world. It changes how you sit in a frustrating morning commute, how you deal with a difficult boss, or how you process a personal tragedy.
You stop asking the victim mentality question, why is this happening to me?
Exactly. And you start asking the empowering question, what is this friction training me for? What virtue is this resistance trying to build in me?
But of course, accepting that reality requires a lot of humility. And, well, not everyone is willing to do that. Which brings us to the next section of the Surah, verses 5 through 7.
The pathology of wealth and arrogance.
Right. Because if kabod is the universal reality, the next logical question the Quran addresses is, how do arrogant people try to artificially escape it?
They try to buy their way out. They try to use the illusion of absolute wealth, status, and power to build a fortress against human fragility. Verse 5 challenges this delusion directly, asking, does he think that none has power over him?
And then verse 6 quotes the arrogant, wealthy elite of Makkah boasting. The verse says, he says, I have squandered wealth in abundance.
Let's pause and do a precise linguistic deconstruction of the Arabic used here, because the terminology the Quran uses is surgically revealing of the human ego.
It really is. The arrogant individual in the verse says, Alaktu malan lubada. I have alaktu enormous wealth.
And as linguists point out, this is a very strange, highly specific choice of words. Normally, when the Quran talks about a person spending wealth, even spending it wastefully, it uses the word anfaqtu, which implies dispensing or circulating money.
Yes, but this person doesn't say, I spent wealth or I invested wealth. He proudly proclaims, I have destroyed wealth. The word alaktu comes from the root halak, meaning utter, devastating destruction.
You have to ask, why on earth would a rational human being boast about literally destroying their own capital?
Because it reveals a deep underlying psychological pathology. It is a pathological need for societal validation and dominance. In the historical context, this individual is likely funding massive, expensive tribal wars against the Prophet or hosting outrageously extravagant public banquets purely to elicit shock, awe, and submission from the lower classes.
Wait, let me push back on this for a second. If a rich guy wants to blow his money on a massive party, or if a billionaire today wants to buy a social media platform or a mega yacht just to show off, isn't that just bad financial literacy? I mean, is it really this deep, dark oppression that the scholars claim it is? Or are we just reading too much malice into rich people showing off?
That is a fair question, and it's exactly where the modern commentary of scholars like Said Qutb becomes essential. Qutb expands this from a critique of one boastful guy in Makkah to a sweeping civilizational critique.
An indictment of Jahiliya capitalism, right?
Exactly, the economic system of ignorance. In that system, human worth is entirely quantified by capital accumulation and ostentatious consumption. The Meccan oligarchy utilized their economic monopoly to enforce spiritual and social conformity.
So it wasn't just innocent bragging.
Not at all. In a society where people are literally starving, where widows have no safety net, and where slaves are being tortured, hoarding massive amounts of wealth and publicly destroying it for status isn't just bad financial management. It is an act of active, violent oppression against the marginalized. They are burning essential resources just to prove they have the power to do so.
It's a massive power play.
Yeah.
It's a manifestation of deep-seated insecurity masked by financial bravado. They are essentially communicating to the public. I have so much capital that I can literally set it on fire, I can destroy it, and it doesn't even dent my net worth.
They fundamentally believe that the sheer staggering volume of their wealth exempts them from the vulnerability of kabod. They think their money makes them immortal.
And then, in verse 7, God responds with a single devastating question that shatters their entire charade. Does he think that none sees him?
It's chilling. The elite operate under the delusion of absolute unchecked autonomy. They think they are the apex predators of the world, answering to no higher authority.
But the Quran dismantles this by invoking the concept of al-Basir, the all-seeing. God is telling them that he doesn't just see the mountain of wealth they have accumulated, he scrutinizes the impurity of the intention behind it.
He sees the illicit, exploitative, corrupt nature of exactly how that wealth was acquired. They may be able to fool the public with their grand displays, but the ultimate auditor of the universe is reviewing the books.
The parallel to modern flex culture is almost too perfect. Think about social media today. You have influencers and celebrities literally destroying capital for views,
Renting private jets for empty photo shoots.
buying absurdly expensive sports cars just to crash them in a YouTube video, wearing clothes that cost more than a teacher's yearly salary, destroying wealth for fleeting digital clout.
They are engaging in the exact same alaktu behavior.
They forget that the all-seeing gaze is tracking the source and the intent of every single cent. You might fool the algorithm, you might fool your followers, but you cannot fool the auditor.
It is a profound, intoxicating delusion. And to further dismantle this delusion of human self-sufficiency, the surah pivots beautifully in the next section. It completely strips man of his artificial wealth, his designer clothes, and his bank accounts, and points him back to his fragile, incredibly basic biology.
This brings us to verses 8 through 10, the biological toolkit and the crossroads of choice. The Quran drastically shifts focus to human anatomy, Verses 8 and 9 ask, "Have we not made for him 2 eyes and a tongue and 2 lips?"
It's almost sarcastic.
Yeah, it's saying, you arrogantly boast about your wealth and your power, but you didn't even manufacture the eyeballs you were using to look at your gold. You didn't create the tongue you're using to brag.
Classical scholars like Ibn Kathir note that these anatomical features aren't merely mentioned as biological facts, they are a divine toolkit bestowed upon us. The eyes allow for the perception of both the physical world and moral truth.
And the tongue and lips allow for complex articulation.
Right, the building of human societies, the transmission of knowledge, and ultimately the conscious declaration of faith. But the Hanbali scholar Ibn Rajab adds a crucial, deeply spiritual layer to this biology.
About the heart.
Yes. He established a profound axiom. The heart is the absolute ruler of the limbs, and the limbs are merely its soldiers.
So the limbs just blindly follow orders. The eyes don't decide what to look at, the heart does.
Exactly. If the inner heart is corrupted by the arrogance and materialism we just discussed, then the eyes will only seek out vanity and illicit desires. The tongue will only articulate boasts, lies, and cruelty.
But if the heart is grounded in a state of kushu,
Which is a profound humility, a quiet stillness and awe before God.
right, if it has kushu, then these physical faculties are transformed into instruments of divine obedience. The eyes seek out those who need help. The tongue speaks justice.
And the ultimate culmination of possessing these biological tools is found in verse 10, and shown him the 2 ways. The Arabic word used for the 2 ways is al-najdain. And this specific word has sparked a really fascinating historical and linguistic debate.
What exactly are the 2 ways?
Well, the overwhelming majority consensus, supported by heavyweights like Ibn Kathir, al-Tabari, and al-Jalalain, is that al-najdain refers to the distinct paths of good and evil. Linguistically, a naj is not a hidden, obscure trail in the woods. It is a prominent, elevated, clearly visible path or highway.
The theological idea here is that God has hardwired into human consciousness an innate, undeniable moral compass. Even without scripture, a human being inherently knows that justice is better than oppression, that truth is better than a lie. The paths are glaringly obvious.
But there is a minority linguistic view that is incredibly interesting, especially given the anatomical context of the verses right before it.
Because verses 8 and 9 explicitly mention eyes, a tongue, and lips.
Right. Because of that, some early Arab linguists argued that al-najdain metaphorically refers to a mother's 2 breasts.
Representing the innate physical and biological guidance provided by God for a newborn infant's literal survival. I mean, think about the miracle of a newborn. It has no learned knowledge, no life experience, yet it is instinctively guided to seek out its mother's nourishment to survive.
It's a beautiful, tender metaphor for divine care, and it contrasts sharply with the arrogant man who thinks he survives on his own power.
But the heavy theological lifting regarding this verse is done by Fakhr al-Din al-Razi. He uses this tiny verse to synthesize and solve one of the most complex debates in human philosophy, the mechanism of free will.
Al-Razi's analysis here is brilliant. I'll explain it without the dense academic jargon. In early Islamic history, society was somewhat polarized by 2 extreme theological factions regarding human agency.
The determinists and the free willers.
Exactly. On one side, you had the Jabriya. They believed in absolute determinism. They argued that human beings are essentially biological puppets. God forces us to do everything, every script is pre-written, and we have absolutely zero choice in our actions.
Which is a very convenient theology if you were a corrupt political ruler. You just tell the peasants, hey, don't rebel against my tyranny. God predetermined that I would oppress you. It's out of my hands. Determinism breeds absolute passivity.
Precisely. It was politically weaponized. On the opposite extreme, you had the Qadariyya. They believed in absolute, totally independent free will. They argued that God has no control over our daily actions whatsoever. We are entirely the masters of our own universe.
And that breeds the exact arrogance the surah is condemning. I built my wealth all by myself. God had nothing to do with it. So how does verse 10 solve this?
Al-Razi uses the exact phrasing of verse 10 to thoroughly refute both extremes. The verse says, and shown him the 2 ways. God provides the biological faculties, the eyes, the intellect, and God clearly illuminates the paths of good and evil.
That entirely refutes the absolute free will argument, because it proves we rely entirely on God's initial guidance, God's tools, and God's framing of reality. We didn't invent the concept of good and evil. God revealed it to us.
But the verse stops there.
Exactly. The verse stops there. God shows you the path. He illuminates the highway, but he does not force you down it. You must activate your own agency and actively choose to walk it.
Which completely refutes the determinists. You cannot blame God for your bad choices because you were the one who took the step.
It's the perfect needle thread. True guidance isn't just passively downloaded into your brain like a software update while you sleep. You have to earn it through conscious effort. It
Hmm.
reminds me of a point made by modern scholars regarding the cosmic order.
About the universe.
Yeah, the universe runs on precise, unyielding calculation. The sun, the moon, the stars, the tides, they follow their exact, predetermined orbits without any choice in the matter. They submit by force of physics. But human free will is the unique, terrifying, beautiful mechanism by which we can either consciously choose to align ourselves with that divine order or arrogantly deviate from it.
And this leads us to the absolute climax of the Surah. You have the tools, you see the two highways, you understand that your struggle has a purpose. Now you have to make a choice. And the Surah is about to tell us that making the right choice is not going to be a gentle, relaxing stroll.
It requires immense effort. This brings us to verses 11 through 16, Al-Aqaba, the radical ascent of social justice. Verse 11 hits the listener hard. It says, Falakahama al-Aqaba. But he has not attempted the steep path, or the steep mountain pass.
The word Aqaba refers to a treacherous, exhausting, incredibly steep uphill climb. It implies an obstacle that requires you to push your body and spirit to their absolute limits to overcome.
And linguistically, there's that tiny Arabic particle fa, right?
Yes, the fa, which translates roughly to but or then, carries immense emotional weight here. Modern commentators like Numan Ali Khan note that this fa conveys a palpable tone of divine disappointment.
It's as if God is leaning in and asking, I gave you the eyes to see the suffering in the world. I gave you the intellect to recognize the right path. I gave you the resources to make a difference. So why did you refuse the climb? Why did you take the easy, frictionless way down into arrogance and apathy?
What follows this verse is a complete, radical subversion of what the Meccan elite believed constituted greatness. They thought greatness was defined by hoarding wealth, having a massive lineage, and oppressing others to show dominance.
The Quran flips the script entirely. It defines true righteousness, the successful climbing of the Aqaba, as redirecting your financial power and your social capital to the absolute margins of society.
The steep climb isn't just sitting in a quiet, air-conditioned room praying for inner peace. It is the grueling, messy, dangerous work of social justice. And the Quran gives 3 highly specific mandates for this climb.
Let's unpack these 3 mandates because they are revolutionary. The first mandate for climbing the mountain pass is Faku Raqaba, freeing a neck. What does that practically mean in the 7th century, and what does it mean now?
In its immediate historical context, Faku Raqaba signifies the literal emancipation of slaves, or paying the heavy ransoms to release unjustly held prisoners of war. You have to remember the entire Meccan economy and the ancient global economy ran on the brutal engine of slavery and human subjugation.
By commanding the freeing of slaves as the very first step of righteousness, the Quran is launching a direct existential attack on the corrupt economic engine of the ancient world.
It is demanding the ultimate restoration of human dignity and the dismantling of systemic oppression. And in a modern context, it extends to fighting human trafficking, mass unjust incarceration, and any system that reduces a human being to property or a commodity.
That is massive. The second mandate is feeding on a day of Maskaba.
Maskaba is a very intense word. It does not just mean missing a meal or being a little hungry. It denotes a period of extreme, widespread famine. It implies a severe economic depression where resources are incredibly scarce and starvation is a looming threat for everyone.
This is a crucial distinction. I mean, it's relatively easy to give charity when your pockets are full, your stock portfolio is up, and the economy is booming. You can throw a few dollars to a charity and feel great about yourself.
But the Aqaba.
Right, the truly steep climb is tested in times of severe scarcity. It is asking you to give charity when it physically hurts you to do so. It's when sharing your food means you yourself might go hungry, or you might be risking your own financial survival. That level of extreme altruism is what constitutes true moral elevation.
Exactly. It's about overcoming the deep biological instinct of self-preservation for the sake of another human being. And the third mandate focuses on specific, highly vulnerable demographics, giving food to the orphan of near relationship, which is makraba, and the needy person in misery, matraba.
I really love the linguistic nuance here. Specifying the orphan of near relationship emphasizes that true charity and justice must start at home. It is commanding you to fix your own fractured family structures, to care for the vulnerable within your own extended circles before you go out trying to save the world just to get public applause.
And the word matraba, that paints such a visceral, heart-wrenching image.
It does. Break that word down for us.
The word Maitrabha comes from the root word torab, which literally means dust or dirt of the earth. So
Ah.
a miskin, a needy person in a state of Maitrabha, is someone who is so utterly destitute, so completely impoverished, naked, and homeless that they are literally cleaving to the dust of the earth.
They have absolutely nothing between them and the dirt.
The Quran is demanding that the believer, the one who wants to climb the mountain to God, must reach all the way down to the dirt to lift that person up.
When you read Sayyid Qutb's reflections on these verses, they hit incredibly hard. You have to remember, Qutb wrote extensively on Islamic social justice while he was enduring brutal, horrific political imprisonment and torture himself. He knew what systemic oppression looked like.
He argued forcefully that these three mandates are not just a quaint little checklist for individual good karma.
Right. You don't just say, oh, I gave a sandwich to a poor person today, check, I'm going to heaven. No, this is a divine mandate for a complete systemic overhaul of society.
Yes. Qutb viewed these verses as the foundational blueprint for a truly equitable civilization. He argued that a society cannot dare to claim to be truly Islamic or truly just in any sense if it tolerates institutionalized poverty, mass homelessness, or the hoarding of extreme wealth by a few elites while others are literally clinging to the dust.
The Aqaba demands that the economic, legal, and social foundations of society be aggressively structured to protect the vulnerable. Wealth must be actively redistributed to eradicate the dust from people's lives.
Yeah.
It is a collective obligation, not just a personal hobby.
Absolutely.
But let's be completely realistic here. Climbing a treacherous, nearly vertical mountain pass, fighting systemic oppression, giving away your wealth during a famine, and carrying the weight of society's most vulnerable. If you try to do that completely alone as an isolated individual, you're going to burn out.
It will destroy you.
It's a psychological death sentence.
Yeah.
And the Court intimately understands human fragility. Which brings us to the necessary solution in verses 17 and 18, the stabilizing net of the community.
The individual mandate for justice absolutely requires a collective safety net to be sustainable. Verse 17 says, "Then he is among those who believe and advise each other to patience and advise each other to compassion."
The verse begins with a prerequisite, those who believe, iman, faith. Why is faith mentioned here after all the action? I mean, can't a secular person or an atheist fight for social justice and feed the poor?
Of course they can, and many do incredible work. But Ibn Kathir makes a vital theological point here. Good deeds, social justice, charity while noble, must ultimately be tethered to a foundational orthodoxy, a belief in the divine creator, to have eternal weight.
So they aren't severed from their source.
Right. He argues that good deeds absent of faith are ultimately severed from their true, infinite source. Orthodoxy, correct belief, and orthopraxy, correct action, are completely inseparable in this worldview. You climb the mountain for the sake of the Creator, seeking His pleasure not merely for the fleeting applause of society or to satisfy your own ego.
Faith is the anchor that prevents your activism from turning into narcissism.
Beautifully said. And then the verse transitions into the etiquette of the climb. It repeats the word tawasa, to mutually enjoin, to urge, or to advise each other. This implies that navigating the steep path of life is inherently a team sport.
Because the Aqaba is so exhausting and so fraught with kabod, with friction, individuals will inevitably falter. They will stumble, they will lose hope, they will want to quit.
The community must exist to act as a stabilizing net. And the two specific virtues they are commanded to advise each other toward are sabr, patience and perseverance, and marhama, deep, empathetic compassion.
I want to spend some real time exploring this concept of mutual advising because it has been so deeply corrupted in our modern era. The Hanbali scholar Ibn Rajab actually wrote an entire brilliant treatise on the etiquette of this. It's called The Difference Between Advising Nasiya and Condemning Tayyar.
And my goodness, if there is any classical text that the modern internet generation desperately needs to read, it is this one.
It is an incredibly profound and convicting text. Ibn Rajab outlines that advising someone to have patience or compassion must be executed with genuine, protective love for the believer. It must be entirely devoid of ego, self-righteousness, or the hidden desire to publicly humiliate them.
Think about how often advice in modern times, especially on social media, is literally just ego-driven intellectual dominance. It's cancel culture disguised as moral theology.
We see someone stumble, and instead of helping them, we publicly shame them. We quote verses at them or call them out in the comments, not to guide them, but to elevate our own status, to get likes, and to prove to everyone else how righteous and knowledgeable we are.
And Ibn Rajab categorizes that exact behavior as tayyar shaming and condemning. He explicitly states that this is a disease of the heart. He says true nasiha, true sincere advice, requires the heart of the advisor to be in a state of khushu.
There's that word again. Humility, brokenness.
Exactly. You must approach the person who is struggling with a completely humble, broken heart. Why? Because you must recognize that you too are deeply flawed. You too are enduring your own kabad, your own hidden struggles. Everyone is fighting a hard battle that you know nothing about.
Therefore, as modern scholars brilliantly frame it, the community must function as a collective shock absorber for the trauma of life.
I love that framing, a shock absorber.
Yeah. Say patience is the shock absorber for external hostility. When the outside world attacks you, when the economy crashes, when you face prejudice, the community rallies around you and tells you to hold the line, to be patient, to persevere.
But marama compassion is the medicine for internal wounds. When you are bleeding out emotionally, when you are grieving a loss, or when you have messed up terribly, the community doesn't lecture you with harsh theology. They show you deep, weeping empathy. They bear your burden with you.
And those who successfully integrate all of this, those who hold on to their faith, who engage in the systemic action of feeding the poor, who endure the kabod with patience, and who blanket their community in true compassion. Verse 18 grants them a majestic title.
They are designated as the Ashab al-Imana, the companions of the right hand.
In Islamic eschatology, these are the souls destined for ultimate salvation, divine elevation, and eternal ease. They survived the kabod of the world, they supported each other, and they reached the summit of the mountain.
But what happens to those who choose the other path?
Right. The ones who looked at the steep mountain pass, looked at the destitute orphan in the dust, and said, "No thanks, I'm going to take the easy descent. I'm going to hoard my wealth, mock the poor, and pretend I have no master."
That brings us to our final section, verses 19 and 20, the ultimate reality check at the end of time. The surah concludes with terrifying, uncompromising finality. Verse 19 states, "But those who disbelieve in our signs, they are the companions of the left hand, the Ashab al-Mashama."
And verse 20 delivers the final verdict. Over them will be a fire closed in. Musada. What does that specific word imply?
Classical authorities like Ibn Abbas, Qatada, and Adahak all heavily emphasize the absolute, inescapable containment of this specific word. Musada translates to a massive vault or a lid that is permanently sealed shut over its inhabitants.
Imagine a colossal dome that drops down and locks. There are no doors, there are no crevices, there's no sliver of light from the outside. There is zero ventilation. It is a state of complete, eternal, suffocating entrapment.
And this is where the masterful, tragic irony of the entire surah is fully realized. When you tie the ending back to the beginning, the structural genius of the Quran is on full display.
Numan Ali Khan highlights how perfectly verse 20 connects all the way back to the core thesis in verse 4, right?
It truly does. Verse 4 established that man is inevitably created in kabad struggle, toil, and friction. The arrogant elite of Makkah and the arrogant materialistic elite of any era exhaust their entire lives trying to artificially escape that worldly kabad.
They hoard wealth, they build massive fortresses, they buy private islands, they oppress the poor, all to create an illusion of absolute autonomy and comfort. They desperately want a frictionless life.
They actively refuse the Aqaba. They refuse to endure the temporary, purposeful, highly meaningful struggle of helping others, fighting for justice, and submitting to God. They thought they were outsmarting the system.
And by rejecting that purposeful struggle, what did they ultimately earn? They guaranteed their entry into an infinitely worse, entirely inescapable struggle.
They transitioned from the temporary, meaningful kabad of the world, which had the potential to elevate them to paradise, into the eternal, meaningless, punitive confinement of the Musada.
The illusion of invincibility they spent their whole lives and all their wealth building is finally, permanently, and violently shattered. They selfishly lock their hearts to the suffering of the poor in this world, so God locks them in the fire in the next.
Wow, that is incredibly heavy. It's a devastating, sobering conclusion. But it leaves the listener with absolute, piercing clarity.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Surah Al-Balad, let's rapidly synthesize the 5 transformative paradigms we've pulled from this blend of classical and modern scholarship. How does this chapter completely rewire how we approach our daily lives?
Paradigm 1. We must completely recontextualize hardship. Kabad is a deliberate design feature, not a flaw. We have to stop viewing the friction in our lives as a cosmic failure or a punishment and start viewing it as the necessary aerodynamic resistance required to actualize our spiritual virtues and elevate our souls.
Paradigm 2. We must subvert our modern materialistic metrics. Wealth is absolutely not a trophy of divine favor. Hoarding it while claiming superiority is a glaring sign of spiritual poverty and deep insecurity. Wealth is merely a tool, a highly regulated, heavily audited tool, meant to be exhausted in the service of liberating others.
Paradigm 3. Faith is inherently, permanently linked to systemic action. Internal orthodoxy demands external orthopraxy. You cannot claim internal piety or spiritual enlightenment while ignoring the institutionalized poverty and suffering around you. Climbing the Aqaba means doing the unglamorous, exhausting work of social justice.
Paradigm 4. We have to build communal resilience through deep empathy, not shaming. We are all enduring the brutal friction of life. If we want our communities to survive the climb, our advice to one another must be rooted in marama, profound compassion, and a humble heart, not ego-driven internet condemnation.
And paradigm 5. We must constantly acknowledge the profound, inescapable weight of divine accountability. God gave us the biological tools to see the paths and the intellect to choose between them. We are not helpless victims of circumstance or determinism. We face a stark binary choice: the steep temporary ascent of moral responsibility or the easy descent of arrogance that leads to the sealed vault.
So, as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. We started this hour by talking about burnout. Our modern hyper-capitalist society is entirely built on selling you the seductive illusion of a friction-free, kabod-free life. We have convenience at the tap of a glass screen. We have algorithms meticulously designed to show us only what we already agree with, shielding us from intellectual friction. We chase extreme wealth so we can isolate ourselves in gated communities, completely shielded from the messy, painful, dusty realities of the world.
We want everything to be easy.
We do. But what if the relentless pursuit of this frictionless life is exactly what makes our human souls atrophy? A muscle without physical resistance wastes away into nothing. A soul without kabod becomes hollow, fragile, and arrogant. What if the struggle you are trying so desperately to run away from today, the difficult relationship you need to mend, the financial stress you are managing, the heavy burden of caring for a sick parent, the terrifying vulnerability of speaking up for justice at your job, what if that exact friction is your Aqaba? What if that struggle is the very mountain pass you need to climb to find your eternal peace? Stop running from the friction. Embrace the climb. Jazakallah khair. May Allah reward you with goodness for spending your valuable time listening to us.